a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Welcome back to Vision 2020. This is Wendy Francis, and I've been your guest presenter this week, filling in for Neil Johnson. It's been a real privilege, but it's also a real privilege for me now to speak with Karl Faase. Karl is a well-known Australian Christian communicator. I was almost going to say commentator, but that he also is that. He's a social commentator, but he's a media presenter and a leader. And on the social commentating, can I just say thank you, Karl, for your very gracious social commentary. There's way too much vitriol out there in social media land, and we never get that from you, so thank you. But back to my intro. Karl is the CEO of Olive Tree Media, which produces some excellent programs for Christian media and local church use here in Australia, so look out for that, but all over the globe as well. You might know Karl as the Daily Nudge, which he's been running for over a decade. Karl, in that way, provides very short but thought-provoking devotionals, and they're on radio, but you can also get them on email. So if you haven't signed up to hear from Karl or get those daily nudges, I do encourage you to do that. After you hear him today, you're going to want to. We'll give you those details shortly as well, but basically just Google Olive Tree Media and you're going to find Karl Faase. So Karl, thank you for your time.
It's great to be here, and that's a very long and gracious introduction. It's good to be with you, Wendy, and your team. And I hope your time at 2020 has been going well.
It has been, and I could have said so much more, but I tried to keep it short. So I reached out to you because this is why I reached out to you. I was watching Facebook. I saw a short commentary from you on Facebook, and you were discussing a recent Netflix series called Adolescence. And basically that series follows a 13-year-old boy who is arrested for the murder of his classmate. But in your Facebook post, you touched briefly on the series, but more so, you indicated that this is a significant thing in terms of a disturbing truth across the Western world. Boys and young men are in crisis. Please talk to us about that.
Well, there's a piece of research coming out of the UK called Lost Boys. It's actually done by the Centre for Social Justice. That's, for want of a better term, a secular group. It's not a Christian group and it's not a government group, although many of the people that are within the organisation are Christians. And I've talked to Ed Davies, who I'm going to interview in a little while. I'll tell you and your listeners why I'm interviewing Ed. But I chatted to Ed about why they did the research. And before I mention the research, he said what they do at the Centre of Social Justice is they talk across much of the UK and they just chat to people like teachers. And he said that for about a couple of years, the people on their staff in talking to teachers, the teachers have been saying to them, there's something going on with young boys and young men, and we don't know what it is, but somebody needs to look into it. So they did this research called Lost Boys, and they clearly called it Lost Boys after they got the results. And the results are pretty devastating, really, that young men are not doing well. And they're not doing well in Western nations globally. I mean, there's a few different things. For many years, young men and men in general take their lives at a far greater rate than women. But there's a number of things, and that's been around for a long time, but there's a number of new trends. I mean, one new trend is those males in the age of 16 to 24 who are NEET, which is not in employment, education or training. Now, if you think about what is somebody who's not in education, employment or training doing? Well, the answer is they're not doing anything. Yeah. And they're not doing anything for the community. They're not doing anything for themselves, and they're not doing anything for their future. Now, the young men in that space have increased over the last basically 4 or 5 years, 40%.
Oh, no.
Like it's an enormous increase. And then all of that, and the other thing that they discovered in the UK was that there is a gender pay gap. And there's a lot of talk in a place like Australia and other Western nations about the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap in that 16 to 24 is that young men earn far less than young women across the board. So, now, I listened to another podcast coming out of the UK, and they the US, and they said the same stats are true there. Under the age of 30 and before the first baby, women out-earn men.
So can I just jump in there and say, for the last 100 years, what we've seen is like great leaps forward in outcomes and rights for women, which we applaud. But now what you're telling me is in this generation it is the boys who are being left behind, and by some margin. In the Australian newspaper today, I was surprised because I knew that we were going to be talking, but in the Australian newspaper today there's an article with the title Young Men's Traditional Gender Beliefs, and it's saying that Australian males aged between 15 and 24 are now holding more traditional beliefs about gender.
Yeah.
Is that all part of this conversation?
I think it is, and and people who are really interested in this, Wendy, and think that this might be a bit of left field. There's been a book released by Richard Reeves, who was a key researcher with the institute, training institute and research institute in the US, and he's written a book called Of Boys and Men. And that outlines all of these issues. Warren Farrell's written a book called The Boy Crisis, and all they're pointing out is that what's happening is that young men are not doing well, which is exactly what you said. And nobody's saying, and this is really clear for everybody listening to us today, Wendy, nobody's saying that women should do badly or that women should do less. Everybody's saying for both genders to do well, and praising God for the Supreme Court in the UK today, demonstrating that there is only two. Yeah. But for both genders to do, both have to do well. It's not a competition between, the boys are down, the girls are up, we've got to bring the girls down. That's not the case. And part of the problem is the term that's been thrown around a lot, toxic masculinity. And there are certainly toxic things that men do on a semi-regular basis. But toxic masculinity is thrown around in such a way that young men, in the brackets that we're talking about, that the Lost Boys research looked at, are asking the question, so what does a bloke look like? What is masculinity? Is all masculinity toxic? And they're starting to look around. And there's another issue here, Wendy, because this is such a big issue. The fact that they don't have adult role models, because unfortunately there's a lot of young men growing up in fatherless families, and then when they go to school, the vast majority of preschool and younger age brackets in school, the teachers of the vast majority are women. That's not a bad thing, but it means that if there's no role model, masculine role model at home, there's not in the school. Where do they get their masculine role models? One podcaster I listened to recently said, tragically, the first adult role model they're going to meet is a prison officer.
So
and
families,
that's actually true.
Sorry, I just talked over you, but families are breaking down at a greater rate in Australia. And one of the research documents I looked at, that was actually an Australian research document from the Australia Institute, because I looked to see if there was any Australian research document that would back this up. And it was saying that fatherlessness is a growing problem in Australia, but it said that 85% of single-parent families are fatherless families. So we know that there are a lot of single-parent families out there. 85% of them in Australia are fatherless.
Yes, and there's a book of somebody else we want to interview, and his name's Ian Rowe. He's written a book called Agency. He's a African American who has started and runs a school in the Bronx. The school is majority African and Hispanics, and his whole point is that the notion that in America African young men are held back by racial inequality is not true. He's saying what they're held back with is fatherlessness, and essentially, he will say to people, do you want the recipe for success statistically? 95% of people who follow this recipe for success in their lives, 97% avoid poverty. And the 97%, these are the four things they do. Finish their education, even if it's just high school, get a job, get married, and have children in that order. If you do that, that reduces the chance of your children being in poverty by 97% statistically. And his whole point is the problem is it's not that there aren't racial issues. Clearly there are. The problem is not racial inequality. The problem is fatherless families and boys living in poverty with no adult role models, with pretty much no future.
The Australian Institute also said this, that 1 in 6 children live in one-parent families in Australia, and again, mostly headed by mothers. So we're not actually being disparaging either against single parents who are doing, In many cases, when I've met them, they're just doing an amazing job. But we've got to say that that's not the ideal. It's not what somebody would choose for their child. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I mean, anybody that's listening to us that's a single parent family and a single mum, good on you. Yeah. Well done. You know, that's a remarkable role. But if you're a bloke listening to us and you're separated from your children and you're giving up because it's difficult, your kids need you. They need you in their lives, and you need to work out a way that you can do that. Don't just give up. Don't just walk away. Be a part of their lives, because your role in young men's life and young women's lives are enormously important. And so all of that is to say that, and if I can just say, Wendy, one of the problems is, where do these young men go to find role models? And the worst place they can go is a thing called the manosphere. And the biggest profile in the manosphere is a guy called Andrew Tate, who is no adult role model. He's pretty appalling. And if young men are going there to find out, well, what is it to be a bloke? That's not the place to go. And we need to help young men find positive roles, masculine roles that they can look up to, and give them a hope and a future and an opportunity for a future.
Because we tend, as humans, to swing violently. We don't tend to settle in that middle space, that middle space. Yeah. So young men who are looking for role models, what I understand is they're increasingly being drawn to traditionalist, conservative, however you put it, very right-wing political movements. And there's danger in that you've just spoken about with Andrew Tate, isn't there?
Yep. Yeah, there is, and I think it's interesting for relationships in the future, because what the research would have shown you, Wendy, is that young men and young women, and even the Lost Boys research has this in its executive summary, is that the political positioning of young men is becoming more conservative, and the political positioning for young women is becoming more kind of leftist and progressive. That doesn't go well for relationships in the future. And if I can just add on relationships, Wendy, one of the things that the Netflix series Adolescence kind of mentioned and is actually found in a lot of the research is that the vast majority of people find their relationships today online and dating apps. And what most people don't know or are not really thoughtful about is that dating apps are not working well for young men. Now, why is that? Because 80% of the women are looking at 20% of the men. And it's basically been said that for 80% of men on dating apps don't have a good experience, don't find a relationship. In fact, it's been said that they have to swipe 200 times to get a coffee date. Of 5 coffee dates, 4 of them don't turn up for your average bloke. So your average bloke is swiping 1,000 times to get 1 coffee date.
What does that do to your self-esteem?
Not a great deal, Wendy. And you don't need to be a genius or a psychologist to work that out. And all we're saying is that it's tough, you know. And in that space, young men, and that's the point of that adolescence in the first 2 episodes, young men are becoming angry, resentful, and those attitudes aren't right. Nobody's saying that they should have those attitudes, but you can see why they end up in that space. And there's this thing called incels, which again is kind of name-checked in the Adolescence series, Netflix series, and incels are involuntary celibates. They're celibate in their life, but it's not because they choose, but because they just cannot find a relationship. Yeah. And that's disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah. You and Jane, your wife Jane, are 2 of the most positive people that I know, to be honest. And you don't just talk about things, you do something about it. And this must not be simply a message of despair for anybody listening, because boys and young men have enormous potential. They always have, they always will. One of the things that I read in that UK report was when our boys thrive, our whole society benefits. That was one of the things that it said. So you are not just taking this sitting down, as you never do. You always seem to be doing something. So you've got something planned to actually tackle this. Am I right in that? And can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. Wendy, we're producing a series for men. We did one in 2010, and it's time to do one again. Yep. And we'll actually in May be chatting to people globally, 5 different global figures that'll be key in this series, and then we'll actually do a studio-based show with myself, Al Stewart, and Sam Chan. It'll be an 8-part episode. It'll be out at the end of this year, beginning of next year, and if people are looking around for a series for men, you'll notice that there's almost none, which is why we're doing this, and we're talking to some of these key characters who've done fabulous research and to give us some insight in what's the future for young men and men in general.
So I recommend that, everybody. Whatever Karl does, he does it very well. So olivetreemedia.com.au. If you're not already on that mailing list, get on the mailing list so that you can watch it. It will help you with your relationships with boys and men, but you'll also be able to share it with others. olivetreemedia.com.au. Karl, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really appreciated even the impetus to look into it for myself. I've got male children and grandchildren. Thank you, Karl Faase, very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.